Well, having talked about culture as a concept, as a term, now we shall go ahead with some of the characteristics of culture. I explained that culture is transmitted from one generation to another generation through learning, and it governs our behavior. It governs the behavior of the members of the given society. So, from this discussion, it becomes clear that culture is learned. As people learn culture from each other. I mentioned that you learn culture, or we all learn culture from our parents, from the family members, or from our siblings, from our neighborhood, from the group of people that belong to our particular community. So we understand that culture is learned, and if it is not learned, it is not culture. That we need to understand. So that is the difference between nature and culture. Okay, for example, you might be knowing, any animal, means baby animal, can swim immediately after it is born. Okay, it does not learn it. It is natural for it to swim. But for us, it is not natural to swim. We have to learn it. Similarly, suppose you grow up in another culture, means suppose you are born in one family and later you are just you are hand over to some other people. So you may have a different culture there. Is that clear? So we need to understand that the way we learn language, culture is also learned. Now, let's try to understand it with the help of example of the fishing rod. Using the fishing rod for catching fish is learned from others, from the older generation. So, for example, we talk about fishermen. So, the children of fishermen family learn how to catch fish. So, that is learning a culture that we need to understand. Language is the part of a culture. We learn language, and the way we learn language, we learn culture too. The way we eat, for example, in Indian culture it is very common to eat with hands, by using hands. Directly, I mean to say, of course, in every culture hands are used, but in European culture, in Western culture, they use spoon and fork. They never eat directly with hands. And for them, of course, it is their cultural perception. Eating directly with hand is a dirty habit. Okay, so and for us, it is not so common to use fork and spoon while eating because we haven't grown up what we call learning that. We grow up learning in a different manner. The way we eat rice, for example, is different from the way South Indians eat rice. We need to understand that. So that is a part of culture. So we grow up learning culture, therefore, it is one of the characteristics of culture. Further, culture is shared, means it is not an individual thing as such, but it is the part of the group that we belong to. We do not have individual culture as such. It is an attribute of individuals as members of groups. So we have shared beliefs, we have shared values, we have shared customs, and therefore our behavior matches. Okay. Further, culture is symbolic. Now, while understanding these characteristics of culture, you must be recollecting some of the characteristics of language. Language is learned, language is shared, language is symbolic. Same in the case of culture. Culture is learned, culture is shared, culture is symbolic. Now, what is a symbol? A symbol, no language, words, for example, are symbols. A symbol is something verbal or non-verbal. Verbal means, for example, we utter words, that is verbal. Non-verbal means signs, body language, etc. So symbol is something that is verbal or non-verbal, and just like language is learned arbitrarily, language is arbitrary. Why a cat is called cat cannot be explained as such. So these are arbitrary symbols, and arbitrarily and by convention they stand for something else. And this connection between the symbol and that particular entity is not necessarily natural. It is symbolic. Okay, so a symbolic thought unique to humans. Culture is unique to humans, and it is actually crucial to learning. For example, handshake, hand waving, etc. Now, handshake is not very common in Indian culture, but because of the influence of Western culture, it has become very common to shake hands. Hand waving, for example. Hand waving is again uh, not so common, wasn't so common earlier, but it has become common. Now it has become universal culture. But the way, for example, Indians, greet is not seen elsewhere. So it is symbolic. This symbol, for example, is Indian exclusively, and shaking hand is European, Western way of you know greeting. Or in certain cultures, in Islam, for example, I think they do this kind of greeting. They use this symbol. In Japan, they have a different way of greeting. They bow down like this. So different cultures have different symbols to express their greeting, express their happiness, express their sadness, etc. Further, culture is all encompassing, means it covers. So, when we talk about anthropology, anthropologists take a broad view of culture. They include even very small things in under culture. It is an umbrella term. As I mentioned earlier, the way we dress, the way we eat, the way we cry, okay, the way we laugh even can become the part of a culture. Oh, okay, means that may not be accepted by other cultures. So for example, corporate culture we talk about. In corporate culture, you're supposed to behave in a very different manner. When while appearing for the interview, etc., you are supposed to behave in a different manner. So your behavior changes. So anything can be included under the umbrella term culture. Culture is integrated, means mm, cultures you can say can be organized around a set of core values. I mean, there is some key value, some basic value, and new ideas that don't fit into these core values are rejected by people. For example, a daughter should marry with the permission of the parents is a culture. And if, of course, the things are changing now, but still, it is not widely accepted. If a daughter or a son goes against the wish of parents, so that is not suitable to a given culture. And when a core value changes, then the part of culture also changes. Now, I still remember that in old days, in certain communities, women were not allowed to, put on chappals. They were not allowed to make the sound of their, what we call anklets, etc. So that was considered bad. Wearing, salwar kameez, jeans was considered to be, against the culture. But now it has become very common because the core value has changed. So a large part of the culture also changes. So this is how we understand that culture changes according to the social change. So what we understand through this discussion is that culture is learned, culture is shared, culture is symbolic, culture is an all-inclusive term, and culture is integrated to the society that we live in. So this is how we get introduced to the term culture in general. Now, you need to understand that cultural studies is not all about culture only. So, we can't simply define cultural studies as the study of culture. In my next lecture, I shall be talking about what cultural studies is and how it developed as an academic discipline. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, our discussion is related to the background of the development of the culture studies. Of course, there shall be certain questions on this background as well. I shall make it clear in the next part of my discussion.